Hey everybody, this is Dr. Maples. We're here to talk about social epidemiology. Social epidemiology is the study of trying to understand how our society is linked in with our individual health. But before we talk about that, can we acknowledge that COVID-19 has changed everything about our experiences? I'm recording this presently in 2020, where we are still under pandemic conditions. This is a video that may be used for subsequent semesters as well. So you can maybe look back in time as you experienced, whether it was in high school or college, this pandemic. But wow, it's changed everything. Isn't it extraordinary how a massive health event like this, too, can change our experiences, even our political sphere? I think it's really interesting how health has become a political issue. And again, recording this just a mere weeks before the election. That said, have you been slightly intrigued by COVID? Have you been maybe reading the news, trying to understand what it all means, and maybe just fascinated on the chase for having some kind of vaccination option and thinking about the conversations about mask use and so forth? Have these been things that have kind of focused your attention? Well, I have good news. You may be a social epidemiologist in the making. Social epidemiology is a field that does not require a medical background. You don't need to be a nurse, for example, or a doctor or something like that to be a social epidemiologist. In fact, it gives us a great chance to study health while not necessarily being one-on-one, face-to-face with people who are actually sick. One of the things, too, that I find about social epidemiology, it's a field that if you are in nursing or in the medical field and you have come to the realization that maybe working with urine and vomit and feces and all sorts of other weird things that can pop out of the human body, not interested in working with those, social epidemiology is actually a great way for you to apply what you've learned within the community and to help others without actually being face-to-face with interacting with that. Likewise, if you're a sociology major or someone who's interested or thinking about sociology and you have an interest in health, it's a good way to blend your interests, and you can get a lot of really cool experiences and courses here at EKU to think about that. So if you're interested in those things, read on, because you could be very interested and find a new career path. Now, social epidemiology is, as I've said, it's a field examining when and how a society might impact one's health. And gosh, even that idea is a little strange. The idea that the individual isn't in control of their health entirely is bizarre. We'll actually talk about that a little bit in the coming slides, but then we'll think about some bigger issues. For example, we'll think about things like Appalachia's issues with diabetes, and we also see surge in hepatitis C. We see HIV rates in the United States, certainly COVID-19, all being things that are not necessarily in the individual's control. They're the subject of things happening around us. So we want to take a moment to think about how where we live and the social experiences that we're having can actually shape our individual health in very unpredictable ways. Or, as we'll learn about in the next couple of slides, sometimes in very predictable ways. Now, I will point out there are some individual things that impact your health, just flat out individual choices. But even those are sometimes socialized. We'll come back to that. Things like smoking. I am not taking an anti-stance on smoking or cigarette companies or tobacco companies or anything. But all the data that we have do show that smoking cigarettes is statistically one thing that will shorten your lifespan. We can see statistically that a 30-year-old smoker, whether it's been short or long-term smoking, probably has around 35 years left, whereas a non-smoking 30-year-old would probably be closer to 50, which is a normal life expectancy. We, at this time, in 2020, have only limited data on vaping, so we don't have necessarily the data to take a clear stance on that. We have seen that avoiding things like diacetyl is a problem. Diacetyl is a chemical that was linked together with popcorn lung. Popcorn lung, as strange as it might sound, is actually called that because it came from a warehouse that was creating microwave popcorn. They were getting exposed to diacetyl, which coincidentally enough gives a butter flavor, aroma, smell, and possibly even taste. But it's very toxic for your lungs. It scars your lungs. And so diacetyl was being mixed in with some vaping fluids, and we saw some serious issues there. Nonetheless, smoking is one of those things that we can pretty statistically prove when it comes to cigarettes will impact your life expectancy. Living in the country, will impact your life expectancy negatively. We'll come to find out that people who live in the country are often more sedentary because we walk less, because guess what? We don't have sidewalks. Where I grew up, there wasn't a park, there wasn't a sidewalk. That wasn't a thing. Likewise, if you live in the city, you're far more apt to walk. You're actually less apt to smoke. And living in a rural area, you also live more remotely from medical care often, particularly in the cases of emergencies like heart attacks. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. We also see, too, that people with college degrees are actually living longer lives as opposed to people with less education, particularly not getting their high school degrees, are living shorter times. And here's a really strange statistical effect. By you getting your college degree, your child is far more likely to A, get a college degree, but B, live longer. Why? You have more resources, you have better insurance to take care of them. It's strange how these things roll over into the next generation, but there you are. These are things that we have some ability to do things with. You can choose not to smoke. You can choose not to use vaping. That includes diacetyl, and realize also that you're using that with your own risk until we have more data. You can choose to live in an urban area where you get more exercise and have better access to medical care. And you can choose to get a college degree because, hey, that's why you're in this classroom anyways, right? So we get our degree, we choose to live in urban areas, and we choose not to smoke. These are things that we can do that will lengthen our life expectancies. However, there are things that statistically we can't do anything about. And notice that these kind of come back to some ascribed statuses that we have from the get-go. For example, things like being male. Nothing you can do about that. But males live shorter lives. Why is that? Well, socialization comes into play here. Males have been socialized to take more risks, to be more aggressive in terms of doing things like drinking and drugs, and to frankly just do really stupid stuff sometimes, like trying to jump ATVs over buildings. And because of that, they're more likely to die young. This also includes things too, like being around guns and perhaps being less safe with them. Choosing to drive without seatbelts, all sorts of things like that males have been socialized to do, but females have been differently socialized. Likewise, there's a really strange effect that males have been socialized to not get medical care. That's a really strange thing that I've seen even in my own family with my own father, who was very resistant to trying to go to the doctor when he was very, very sick with kidney dialysis or kidney an infection in his kidneys, nephritis. And it was a really strange thing to see because my mom was like, no, you're going to the hospital and that's that. And my dad's like, no, it's nothing. It's an infected toenail. It's not a problem. Well, his kidneys were dying. It was a very big thing, but he was resistant even until the end about going to the hospital. I believe my mom threatened to divorce him if he didn't go get in the ambulance. Which is actually one of the reasons why males who get married actually live longer lives statistically. A married male is someone who is far more apt to get medical care, and that's really the main thing. Males who are unmarried, they typically don't have that person there who's saying, no, you're going to the hospital and that's final. Whereas with married males, they do. And in my father's case, that was the reason that he lived an additional 2 decades. Otherwise, he would have died within probably a matter of hours had my mom not told him, you're going to the hospital and that's final. Interesting thing, though, females don't experience some of the ridiculous socialization that males have that shortens their lives. As such, they're far more apt to get medical care. In fact, overall, females may statistically have slightly worse health than males in general, but they're more apt to get a solution to it, and they're more apt to address it. And as such, they lower the risks of heart attacks and all sorts of other things. Females actually live normal life expectancies regardless of being married. And so this is a really exciting thing that, we see with males. It's something that's truly lengthening their life. And while the data so far are supporting this idea through earlier data that's on opposite sex marriages, we probably will see the same thing with same-sex marriages. The data are still kind of new on this, so we'll have to check back in a few years to see that. But we kind of think that being married in general will make males live longer. But females are already socialized to get medical care, and so that gets rid of that issue right away. So there you go. If you're female and you don't want to get married, there's a great reason not to, because it's not going to make you live any longer. Males, however, you should get married because it's going to make you live longer. Something to think about. That said, too, there's other ascribed statuses that impact us, and this is one that we don't really understand quite fully, is the idea of how race shapes our life expectancies. In a moment, we'll look at some life expectancy data and see that persons who are Black live shorter lives, as do people who are Latinos, people who are Native American. There are some really weird impacts here in the United States, and we don't fully understand that. But again, people who are Black typically live shorter lives in the United States. And we also see, too, that Black males have a very high infant mortality death rate. Infant mortality means that you die within the first year of life. From the moment you're born to your 366th day, if you die in that range, that would make you infant mortality. After that, you're just normal mortality. And before that, you're prenatal mortality, if I'm not mistaken. We don't really understand why that's the case, though, that Black male babies are at high risks of infant mortality. We don't understand it. Likewise, too, we don't fully understand how race shapes mortality. One belief, however, is though that it has to do with the stress of experiencing racism. This has a long-term effect on your health because as you have increased experiences with stress, this has very undesirable impacts on your body, and it's hard to undo those over time. And so those can lead to all sorts of things like hypertension, and all sorts of other health issues. So we think that there may be an impact there, but this is something that's still being examined. So we can see where these ascribed statuses have some really weird impacts on our life because of how we're socialized. Now, if we're looking at life expectancies in general, males are looking more or less at about 76 years. That's slightly going down. It's gone up a little higher, and now it's going down a little bit. Females, it's actually going longer. 81 is about the average for life expectancy, and that's continuing to go up, and we think that'll continue to go up. Male life expectancy is taking a little bit of a dip right now. What explains part of that? Well, the opioid situation in the United States could explain a little bit of that, but there's a lot of other things that could come into that. Social epidemiologists are looking at those. So if you're interested in exploring that, you might be a social epidemiologist. If we break these things down by sex and by race, we see that white males are living about 76 years, not 7.64, and Black males are living about 71. So you can see where there's a very big difference in terms of race there. Whereas we see with white females, it's slightly up from the average, whereas with Black females, it's slightly down. This is where we can see some very strange impacts. So even though we make a lot of personal decisions about our health, there are limits on what our individual actions can do. There are things, such as our sex and our race, that have strange impacts on how long we're going to live. That gives us some basic information about that. I want to call our lecture there. In our next lecture, we're going to start thinking about how social epidemiology and the kinds of things that are happening in our society can continue to shape our health in unpredictable ways. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have thoughts, feel free to share them with me. Likewise, I want to stress that take the time to embrace taking care of your own health as best you can. Realize that, while we can't change things like our sex and race, what we can do is choose to do things like not smoke, live in areas where we get great medical care, and more. And most importantly, get that college degree because you're practically there. I want to see you at the graduation stage. All right, if you have questions, you know where to find me. Otherwise, we'll talk soon. See ya.